Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Jean-Pierre Green and I head up the Digital and Technology Leadership practice here at Eton Bridge Partners. This is the latest edition of our webinar series, which has become a regular fixture over the past couple of years and proven to be extremely popular and successful thanks to your support. The plan today is to have a board level conversation with our special guest, who I'll come on to introduce in just a moment, for around 40 minutes or so. On the topic of digital acceleration and disruption, and then follow that with a Q&A session for around about 15 minutes based on questions that many of you have already submitted via the registration process. And of course, you're very welcome to put questions to us live in real time via the chat function, and I'll do our very best to field those as well. Today's webinar, I'm delighted to say, has drawn over 500 registrations from our C-suite network, which we're very pleased about. So thank you for your interest. And before I introduce our guest, allow me for a moment to provide just a very brief update on Eton Bridge Partners, if you would. So as a reminder, we are a leading executive solutions business, which straddles executive search, interim management, and business consulting as our core offerings. We are set up to support our clients across the full breadth of corporate leadership when hiring at C-level and C-level -1, which also includes NEDs and chairs. We're completely sector agnostic and work with a diverse range of organizations, from big global listed juggernauts to small cap, rapid growth PE-backed organizations. And internally, we are structured along specialist practice areas, which provide true functional expertise and depth of market knowledge. We recently reached a very proud milestone of employing over 100 staff. And have roughly 300 or so trusted associate interim executives working through Eton Bridge Partners in the market at any given time, which is a very respectable footprint. Our strategy hinges on being a people-focused and relationship-driven outfit with a refreshingly human approach, focused on quality and reputation, safeguarding our very special culture, which binds us and underpins everything that we stand for, which many of you already know. Our pillars for growth are to drive our market share in private equity, currently representing around 40% of our total assignments. Our international expansion, which has seen us execute over 250 mandates spanning 35 countries over the past couple of years, from China all the way to Chile and everything in between. Continue to mature and build out our functional specialisms. And to turbocharge our business consulting offering, which has really taken off and seen some fantastic demand. So as you can see, super exciting stuff, and I'm pleased to say that year-to-date business performance has been really, really strong and outlook very positive, in spite of, I suppose, some undeniable sort of market headwinds as well. Anyway, enough about that, and back to the main event of today, and I am thrilled to be able to introduce my guest to you, Adam Banks. Hello, Adam.
Hi.
How are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
Good, very well, thank you. Good to see you again, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon and for sharing your pearls of wisdom. So, I mean, essentially, you've had a distinguished career centered on major digital transformation with a big T, as I like to put it, culminating with a seat on the exec committee and board at Maersk Group, where you were CDIO, initially leading on a major recovery of a sort of well-documented cyber attack, which is a conversation for another day, no less sort of fascinating and topical, of course. But most of all, truly digitizing the business, leading on game-changing, market-disrupting digital transformation and innovation agenda. You've since hung up your exec boots and switched now to a very successful plural NED portfolio, which includes sitting on the board of a FTSE 100 organization, as well as advising several startups as well, which I'm sure you're thoroughly enjoying. So that was my best attempt, Adam, at sort of positioning you. I hope I didn't do you a disservice, but I'm really looking forward to our conversation this afternoon. I sort of suggest we get straight into the thick of the subject. I think you and I agreed that probably a good place to start would be to perhaps give a little bit of definition around digital transformation, which I know is perhaps a likely can of worms and perhaps a bit provocative, knowing that digital transformation is certainly has been a very fashionable term, and everyone's got their own interpretation as to what it means, and undoubtedly up there in the sort of used and abused category. So it'd be really very helpful, I think, to sort of frame the conversation with really your thoughts on what digital transformation means, and where you stand on that debate, Adam.
Okay, I mean, as you say, used and abused, definitely overused. For me, and we could pluck out a number of definitions from online, but the question you need to answer is what's different between IT and digital. We've been doing IT for 5 decades. There's a set of proven patterns and methods and processes to make IT happen. Why do we need all this digital stuff? Because the moment you get into digital, people start talking about changing the company. And it's no longer about IT and the IT team. We need to change the company. We need to change the culture. But there's got to be something fundamentally different if that's true. And if there's not, then why go through all of that pain? Why not just do it the old way? Yeah. So the definition I prefer is that IT is about automating processes that existed when they were manual. Digital is about the creation of processes that are only there because you have technology, or only able to be there because the technology enables it. And that subtle distinction is what drives all the difference in methods, approaches, behaviors, delivery models, everything else. So if I can give you an example from my past of 2 things that it's actually the same problem solved twice.
Yeah.
And it's to do with loading a ship. So you wouldn't believe how complicated it is to load a ship. There's about 24,000 articulated lorries on a big ship. And when they come into port, you need to plan what goes where. You don't want to put fertilizer next to diesel oil for obvious reasons. You equally don't want to put the heavy stuff on the top unless you want to see the bottom of the ship fairly quickly. Same with front and back, left and right. There's a whole load of constraints. And the way that's historically been done is 48 hours before the ship is due to leave, they conceptually close the port gates, take stock of what's in there, look at all the different types, work out what should go, literally do a plan, and then start executing, lifting stuff up. Now, the step 1 automation of that was not to digitize it, was to automate it. And so what we did is took the humans out and put some intelligence in and some compute power in, so the compute power could work out what to load. Wind forward 2 years later, and rather than closing the port gates at 48 hours, we were actually aware of where every one of the containers was. So what you can start to understand is where they're going to be when you load the ship. And if they're going to arrive just in time, why not plan to have them on board? So now you've got a completely different model. Rather than it being event-based, it's state-based. And the commercial implication of that is that if you're the last box on and the first box off, a 25-day journey only takes 21 days.
Yeah.
That's commercially meaningful to a fruit grower. You can charge more for that. So again, you're having to connect people who used to be in the back office, basically executing stuff on paper, direct to a customer and their commercial needs. And that's where all of your different capabilities start to come in, and where it becomes much more of a team game than it was when it was just IT.
Yeah, indeed. And when we spoke the other day, you sort of brought it to life really nicely for me as well, in terms of your recent experience as a consumer with a retailer that we won't name, but I thought that was quite telling as well.
Yeah, so it's a retail that has stores, and it used to be a case that you would go in and you'd sort of order something online. If you wanted to click and collect, you went in and you tapped in your order number into a device in the store, and they got your product ready. What they've done now is they've switched that to an app. So
that's very digital.
On the face of it, digital. Unfortunately, they haven't changed any of the behind the scenes processes. So I ordered 3 things in 3 separate orders. And when I get to the app, what I do is open up and it says, tell them you're here. So click I'm here. So I clicked I'm there, and I go up to the counter, and guess what? I've got 1 order. And basically what I had to do is go into each order and click I'm here for each order, because their process is still based around the order, not based around the customer. And if they were to move to a genuine digital model, how many times do you order 3 things and only want to pick 1 up at a time? Yeah. The right approach would be to say, we know who the customer is, we know what all of their orders are, and we'll service them in 1 bang. I did raise that with them, but it didn't go down too well.
And so that, a good example of what in your mind doesn't sort of fit into the true digital transformation sort of bucket, and probably more so the IT automation side of things.
Yes, so they basically applied IT to an existing problem without doing the digital thinking.
Yeah, indeed. Very good. And so in terms of, I guess a lot has been said about digital acceleration and disruption, and tech advances, whether it's, Internet of Things, machine learning, metaverse, digital twins, big data. Obviously AI has sort of dominated a lot of headlines recently, of course. It'd be really helpful if you could perhaps help us make some sense of it all, and more to the point, perhaps sort of pick out what in your mind are some of the sort of digital advances or tech advances that are having a real meaningful impact today, versus a lot of which could still be sort of classed as hype.
Okay, so the first thing to say on this subject is it's typically a decade from the technology invention to its first real use. That sounds a long time, but even the cutting edge companies, so let's take Uber. That was 2016, I think, when Uber came out. The technology you need to do Uber is a smartphone with GPS. That came out in 2007. It is typically that length of time it takes someone to get their head around a game-changing use case for the technology in question. So perversely, most of the technologies that are having impact today are the technologies that were around late 2010 to sort of early 2015. So that would look like cloud. And I'm sure a lot of your audience are going to go, my company's already in the cloud. I'm sure you are, but you're probably not really cloud native. We've moved stuff, it's the same IT digital debate. We've moved stuff we used to run in the data center to the cloud. Actually, if you were genuinely cloud native, like the Amazons of the world, you can scale up and importantly scale down in an instant.
Yeah.
And then what that means is your running costs become wholly variable rather than fixed. I don't know how many CFOs in the audience are looking at a wholly variable IT spend. I suspect not many, because actually that migration hasn't happened yet. So there's a lot of focus still on how to do that, both from a cost perspective, but also a customer service one. I mean, many products have that daily, weekly, monthly, annual cycle of high demand, low demand. Actually being able to scale your service provision up to something that's meaningful enough that you can service all the customers in parallel becomes quite important. The broadcasters are very good at that, actually. Broadcast have a very, very scalable model in the way they broadcast things like F1 around the world. It is very, very smart. So cloud would be one. I
think your point there, Adam, being that cloud's been around, people talk about it, but it's about being truly cloud native rather than sort of just sort of starting out on that journey and not sort of maximizing the potential of it.
Yes, so it's basically being a cloud enabled organization. So what's holding Amazon back is its inability to get drivers. I mean, they've solved the pure tech side of things. They've actually yet to solve the distribution model fully. During the pandemic, it was the lack of drivers that really hurt them. They couldn't expand into various countries, yet all of their websites, all of their back office warehousing capability was stood up and ready to go. But without the last mile, what's the point? And so we've got businesses that have yet to solve their internal ecosystems around the cloud. Mm-hmm. AI is real, and I'm not on about the chat GPT stuff, which is indeed real, but it's not going to have an impact for quite some time. People might remember, was it the 80s when IBM beat Garry Kasparov at chess with Deep Blue? Yeah. So that's how long the intelligence has been around. And it is starting now to have some real impact. Mm-hmm. So most of us that bank in the UK are fairly used to the very annoying automated assistants and chat things that are floating around there. Whilst they may be painful for us, they are having a meaningful P&L impact in terms of customer service costs for the banks. And I think we're going to see those increase in usage. Mm-hmm. I would hope they increase in the I as much as the A. They've got a lot of A in them at the moment. They're very artificial and not very intelligent. Well, what we need is some genuine intelligence in those. And the advance of AI in the background actually is starting to enable genuine AI and genuine customer service without an employee providing much in the way of input.
Yeah.
ML, which again is easily confused with AI, but basically the ability of machines to start solving problems. So rather than actually a programming machine to solve a problem and then executing the machine working on what that problem is, we had quite a bit of that at Maersk. So we were using data streams from physical things. So imagine the motor on a crane that's lifting a container up and down. I hate to think how many thousand times a day it does it, but it does it a lot. Vibration, temperature, there's a whole set of data you can take in a stream out of there, and then you can use machine learning to start to understand what failure looks like, and therefore get predictive around what failure looks like, and plan your maintenance around avoiding the failure rather than fixing it when it fails.
Yeah.
That's now quite a widely or increasingly widely used approach, and I think we'll start seeing that really come to the fore and changing some of the physical world in a way we haven't seen technology do before.
Okay.
Big data around in the late teens fundamentally failed because people didn't realize it was a CEO topic, not a CIO topic. If you genuinely want to be into big data, the first question is, who are your partners? Who are you willing to share your data with, and what value can you co-create? One of the ones we looked at when I was at Visa was Amazon knows exactly what you're looking to buy, because you Google or search, or you Amazon and search. Visa could tell them exactly what you bought. So Google data around JP's looking for a 47-inch TV is quite interesting. If you can augment that with, and he hasn't yet bought one, it becomes even more interesting. So how do you identify these other parties in a data ecosystem that start to enrich both sides rather than just one? So I think we're going to see those increasingly come to the fore. The tech that's getting all the focus today will get there, but I can't see any certainly established business being fundamentally changed in the next decade because of that. It takes too long for people to work out how to use it.
Is that, sorry, are you talking about specifically big data at this point?
No, the stuff that's getting the headlines.
Okay.
So the chat GPTs, when it eventually comes, quantum is going to have a massive implication. It's still not there yet. And so when I say a big implication, it'll be 5 to 10 years after it actually arrives, and it hasn't arrived yet. So that's a decade or so away.
Yeah.
I think the future game changers are likely to be more in the way of AI and quantum than anything else.
Right.
But if you retire in the next decade, don't get too stressed about it yet.
But it's still your opinion then that we're 10 years off the pace in terms of these technologies truly having a meaningful impact?
We always are. So and it's not just the IT type tech. The first cars had to have someone walking in front of them with a flag. They were just noisy horses, quite frankly. There was no societal change as a result of migration from horses to cars. And it's exactly the same with all tech today. It takes a period of time before people understand it well enough to revolutionize something.
Well, indeed, and often it's not about the technology, and we'll come on to sort of talk about this a little bit later, I think. But it's actually then the transformation around sort of behavior, mindset, culture, all those bits of the jigsaw that need to come together, and that's the bit that inevitably takes time and is obviously a sort of elongated change curve. But we'll come and talk about it. But change and transformation, you would think that most organizations are a lot more savvy around, sort of the topic now, I suppose, and whether we would see some acceleration in that change curve to embrace the technology sooner than the sort of 10-year cycle that you're referring to.
So I don't think it's an application issue. It's an understanding issue. The experts understand it on day one. The sort of interested hobbyists understand it maybe a year later. Then by the time, so let's take a real example. McDonald's is a business that is wholly enabled by oil. 55% of McDonald's stores are only accessible by car, and most of the product has oil content based in it. So the wrappers. I thought
you were referring to the food then, Adam. I was a bit concerned.
I am.
Oh, right, okay.
The release agent for the buns has paraffin in it. I mean, it is a business that could not exist without oil.
Right.
And yet no oil man at the start of the oil revolution is going to start thinking about burgers. It takes time for this information to seep through society, and then other sectors start to realize that the disruption that was happening somewhere completely tangential to where they're focused creates a business opportunity, and that's the bit that takes a decade or so.
Okay. So is it your sort of opinion then that as far as what we should keep an eye out for going forwards in terms of next generation tech advances, actually they're probably already here, and sounds like quantum certainly is sort of right, an AI course right at the top of your list of things to have an eye on and be mindful of in terms of the impact that they'll have further down the track?
Yes. So the next 3 to 5 years, most businesses will be wrestling with things like cloud, big data, data lakes, ML, AI. From 2028 onwards for the next 5 years, if we're lucky, it will be quantum and more AI. Yeah. If we're not lucky, quantum will take another 5 years after that.
Okay, interesting. Very good. Fine. And it'd be useful then to so perhaps bring to life and explore a little bit, and we touched on it a little bit there, but some of the significant value creating opportunities, therefore, that some of this sort of technology involves. What does it really mean to today? What are we seeing in terms of value creating opportunities in businesses?
So I'll split the world into two halves: physical and non-physical, because they are quite different in terms of the opportunities and the value pools. So the physical world has been a bit of a laggard because in technology terms, the reason for that is it wasn't until 2015 to 17 that ubiquitous connectivity, meaningful battery life, and the price of sensors got cheap enough that businesses could look at being totally state aware, understanding where all their things were at all times.
Yeah.
Back to it takes a decade. We're still not a decade yet on from 2017, so it's only really the leading organizations that are taking advantage of that today. Those that are fundamentally reinventing their processes. So one of the businesses that I work with is one of the world's largest mining companies. It takes 4 months to sink an air shaft down to a deep mine. Don't have people in it. I mean, if you don't put people at the bottom of the mine, you don't need air. So you've now just saved yourself 4 months of digging. When you can focus their efforts on 4 months of mining, that is a meaningfully different level of productivity for that organization.
Yeah.
Similarly, when it comes to surveys, using drones to do close-up scans and using LiDAR to actually scan the inside of it, you're able to model and identify so much more efficiently in a way that just the technology didn't exist a decade ago to do. So physical, I think, has got a lot of opportunity, and it will be around the creation of data in the first place by putting sensors on things, and then the ability to understand it and change your model and change your processes to leverage that value. The example being airless mining. I mean, it might sound no difference to having people digging it down at depth, but it's hugely different from a mining perspective. The same would be true of logistics. So physically moving products around and manufacturing. Most of those things are event-based. So you've got the production line, and when it comes out of my section, it goes into your section, and so on and so forth.
Yep.
We're going to be able to take that mindset into the real world outside of the factories, because we'll be able to understand the flow of things and then start to optimize in the same way they did during the Industrial Revolution, optimize that end-to-end chain, but now outside of a factory rather than inside of a factory. The virtual world is much more customer-centric. The opportunity exists by using technology to create a new level of empathy with your customer, understand them to a completely different degree, and therefore service needs that maybe you had not considered before.
Yeah.
That's what we're typically seeing in financial services. There's a big focus on what most of the banks call life events, and the ability to, again, use things like ML and spending patterns to actually work out where you are in your life, what you need, and therefore be ahead of the game with servicing you with a loan or a mortgage or something else before you actually have to come and ask for it. I think we'll start to see that really take off. Now open banking is there. Some banks have the visibility to all of your financial transactions, so you can make much more informed assumptions about your current state of affairs.
Yeah, indeed. And just out of interest, how much do you think is driven by, I guess, sort of customer value, commercial value, versus cost optimization opportunities, which you also referenced?
So in the physical world, it's primarily cost optimization. I mean, there is new commercial value to be had, but it is more of an efficiency play than anything else.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got a company that's 60 billion and owns 60 billion of assets, which many of the physical world organizations do, they've got to start sweating those better. So that tends to be that kind of play. When in the non-asset centric businesses, I would say it is more around the value creation. But equally, they tend to be more customer focused in the first place, because without assets, they have to have something else. And usually it's an in-depth understanding of their customer base.
Yeah. So is it your opinion when sort of CFOs or boards, executive leadership teams are talking about the opportunity in AI, perhaps even in machine learning, you know, that they're really sort of thinking about the customer experience and the commercial gains and opportunity, less so than the sort of, you know, cost optimization around sort of labor efficiencies?
I think it's both. So we started the Maersk transformation around 10 customer outcomes. So that was very, very customer centric and all driven by our customer experience and where we felt the value was going for the customer. We did do cost optimization. I mean, we took $6 billion a year out of the fuel spend through being able to optimize the physical shipping network. But the objective was customer connectivity, customer sat, market share, more than it was drive down the cost base. I work with other businesses that, so Rio Tinto as an example, is much more in the let's optimize for cost. They're primarily B2B. The only time they're B2C is when they sell to countries rather than consumers. So you know, China does bulk buying of things like iron ore. So the value opportunity there is much, much smaller in the new product.
Yeah, indeed. Interesting. Okay, good. And so what's your view on how that sort of then filters down into what it all means for your average enterprise, and particularly when we sort of talk about operating models and the shape, I guess, of future businesses and where we can expect to see some interesting sort of impact?
So for me, that's fairly multifaceted. So if we talk about the execution first, and then we'll talk about the customer second. So if we accept it's not IT, it's something different. We need specialists. We need specialists in IT that do the IT bit, but equally that knowledge has to bleed out into the rest of the organization. So you've got to start questioning, do you need an IT function that has some sort of boundary around it, or actually do you want that boundary to dissolve such that there are specialisms and expertise, maybe in data modeling, for example, outside of IT? Certainly in banking, I mean, there is a requirement to own the risk models, for example. All risk models have to be owned by the board and reviewed by the board.
Yeah.
The risk model might be written in code somewhere in some authorization engine or payments engine, but actually that has to be understood in the risk function, in the finance function, in marketing, and by the board. So you're starting to see the barriers break down there. But if you extend it to its full extent, one of the banks I'm on the board of, they want to become a digitally enabled bank, so that they see potentially more value in understanding the customer deeper using data, and therefore they give you a loan that they wouldn't otherwise give somebody else. So most banks that I work on are rule set. So loan to value, 95% maximum. Yeah, we're all familiar with that number. Buy to let is only 60%, or there's a set of policies that define the lending. If you own 3 houses and you outright, and you walk into a bank wanting to buy a house for your mother, and you want 100% mortgage on it, those policies will say no. Yet one quick look at your total asset base would say, hang on, this new house is probably going to represent 5% of the total asset base or 10% of the total asset base. We should be saying yes. Think of the cultural difference in that. So yes, we can set the tech up, we can build the data warehouse, we can do the analytics, we can say, actually, yes, give JP a mortgage. But the guy that you talk to when you walk into your local branch, who's probably 27 years old on 25,000 a year, takes no risk for the bank whatsoever today, just applies policies, now has to be in the driving seat of a machine that's going to make a decision that says we're going to lend you $1 million. that's a huge cultural change for the organization. And therefore, you can't just leave it to the specialists. They can do the tech bit, but that's just spending money. To get the value, we've got to drive that change across the whole organization. Yeah. And I think the more we can spread the knowledge, the easier that becomes.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, very interesting. Thank you for that, Adam. Very insightful indeed. And what about sort of it's very difficult to disassociate a conversation about AI without people fearing for their jobs. So when it comes to future operating models, what's your view on again sort of the impact there?
I think we're quite a long way from that today. AI use today is primarily for screening to try and make a smaller number of people more efficient. So yes, you can say we haven't got the 20,000 people in the call center anymore. We're down to 15,000 and 5,000 AI bots. If you look at what the call centers do, I mean, the highest, still, believe it or not, the highest number of calls into the UK's largest bank's call center is what's my balance?
Right.
Yeah, if you're a customer services agent, how many times in a day do you want to answer the question, what's my balance? I mean, there is a chunk there, you just go, that should be offloaded. Mm-hmm. Whether it's offloaded to a mobile app and I as the consumer check it myself, or whether it's offloaded to some small amount of intelligence that isn't human at the end of a phone that tells me what my balance is, that's got to be a better option than wasting a human being's valuable time with that. Mm-hmm. So yes, there will be some job creep, but we're not at the moment looking at intelligence that has even the smallest eye. When you spell intelligence, it's a fairly dumb tool, and I think will be a fairly dumb tool for quite some time. But in the next 5 years, job losses, I would say unlikely.
Yeah, indeed. And the interesting point you raised there as well is around the sort of customer behavior and acknowledging that you can have the tech, you can have the sort of the setup in terms of wanting to sort of push that digital first approach, but in the end you've also got to be sort of cognizant of the customer and their preferences. And it's pretty baffling to hear that still there are that many customers out there that want to call up to a call center to find out what their balance is.
Well, what you'll find now, most banks, if you go in and say you want to do something in the branch, the first thing they'll say is, have you got the app, and I'll do it with you through the app. They're training you.
That's an education process, isn't it? Yeah.
It is. They're just seeking to get you to self-serve, and we're going to have to go through that cycle in many industries.
Yeah, indeed. Very good. And so a couple of things I want to cover off. Very keen to sort of talk about, I suppose, the when and the timing, because you made the point there around the technology sort of existing, but perhaps not being quite sort of ready, as it were. So what's your view on both whether the tech is ready today, whether that's AI, obviously quantum, the sense is probably not, but AI and ML and some of the other things we've touched on, is that tech ready for application, immediate value gain application? And I guess, are businesses ready and the market ready? Because you probably sort of draw some parallels and analogy with the electric car vehicle sort of world where, frankly, I'm not in a position or interested. I'll probably get some criticism for this, but I'm not ready to sort of invest in an electric car because the infrastructure is not there, and it frankly doesn't work as far as I'm concerned at the minute. So I wondered if there were some parallels to be drawn there around some of this advanced tech opportunities.
So with the exception of quantum, I would say all of it is there and ready to use. But our business is ready is a more interesting choice, because if we accept this difference between digital and IT, we actually don't know what good looks like. So in IT, we know what good looks like. We've got the process today. It's the best process it can be. We just want it faster. Go and automate that. In digital, we're saying the process will not be what it is today. It's going to be something different. That's why this is digital. Therefore, it's a bit of an exploration. And if organizations are going into these large-scale transformations believing they know the end result, the only thing I can guarantee is that they're wrong. The customer won't behave the way you expect them to. Your partners won't behave the way you expect them to. You'll discover something with the technology partway through that means you can take a shortcut. It will be different to the way you think it is today. That's the whole point. That's why Agile was created. That's why we see completely different delivery models and organizational models for delivery of digital. So for me, they can choose to be ready by choosing to accept that there is vagary we can define the value we want from it. So to your point, we want a 10% uptick in revenue over 2 years. Great, perfectly adequate target. What you can't do is actually develop the plan to do that and sign it off. You have to accept that there is this vagary and discovery process along the way. And then it's around how you govern that appropriately. And is everybody involved, or are we going to punish failure along the way? Because if you're saying failure is a problem, actually don't do exploration, because most people that do exploring fail more than they succeed.
Yeah.
And you know, it is a cultural choice and a real strong leadership choice to be made.
Yeah, indeed. And we'll come back to that because it's an interesting point to elaborate on. And in terms of, I suppose, the backdrop at the moment around sort of political macroeconomic factors, you know, what's your view on how that might be stifling sort of digital transformation or digital sort of evolution at the moment?
Without wanting to go too much back to the exploration point, although I'm going to, I don't believe it should stifle. But again, if you've got a balanced portfolio of activity across your business, you're going to want to be some of it in the absolute, it's hardcore execution, let's just thrash the hell out and deliver the value. Others are going to be, and now let's go and search for the big opportunities that sit out there. As long as we're keeping that balance of portfolio, the question is, how big is the portfolio as a total? What we don't want to see is people cutting out all the risk and saying it's just the execute, because that will create a gap in 2 to 3 years' time when we've got nothing then to execute because we weren't doing the research today. So for me, the macroeconomic question starts to question the size of the pot, not the percentages that are spent where. And it's about making sure that we are keeping it whole and keeping the pipeline of ideas and innovation flowing through the business in the way that they should. Given the start to finish life cycle of this kind of stuff, if you were going to squeeze anything, the thing you'd probably squeeze is the stuff that's just starting up in execution, rather than prior to that or after that. And so for me, I would say the economic cycle is unlikely to impact, or should not impact, the thinking around the true digital transformation type activities.
Yeah, although obviously there's an investment consideration, undoubtedly.
Absolutely, and I say that comes back to the whole pot question. Do you de-emphasize? But again, in good portfolio management, you want to set your target, and then it's a case of selecting the ideas and selecting the best ideas that get you that target at the cheapest. So what we're probably just doing is increasing the hurdle rates. So actually, it's better ideas, not less ideas, that we're starting to push for. Now, better may mean there's less around, but we need to go away and think a bit harder if that turns out to be true. You know, if we've not got enough to do to deliver that objective, then we need to think harder rather than look for more money. Yeah,
indeed. And actually, on a sort of very relevant, I think, point, one of the questions that's come through from the audience was, I suppose, that the consideration of investment in digital transformation, in new tech advances, and the opportunities that we've talked through. But how does that play into a much smaller enterprise in terms of the proportion of investment required, to sort of deliver the value back to, it's all well and good if you're a large corporate, and undoubtedly you're embarked on that journey with a big investment pot behind it. But where do the smaller businesses fit into the dynamic of what's happening in the market?
So again, I think that's probably more variable in terms of, you're going to have small businesses where this current downturn has created an opportunity. You're going to have others that are going to create a real constraint. The ability to pivot, the ability to stay whole business agile is something that small businesses have much more effectively than large. So for me, it would be around preserving that optionality and that choice for as long as you possibly can along the journey. I.e., don't bet the farm on anything specific.
Yeah.
But pursue as many ideas as you can that retain the optionality and the ability to change direction, rather than a significant reduction stroke cancellation of activity. I would be looking much more at that route.
Yeah, and is there a view, though, that there's a disproportionate investment required in things like AI and ML for the value that's going to be created for those small businesses?
No, I wouldn't say so. Increasing where. If that statement were true, what you've done is create a marketplace for third-party providers, and they tend to fill that market space pretty quick. So you may end up with a quarter or a 2-quarter void where to do it yourself is going to be too expensive, but within a quarter, someone else will do it for you at a, let's say, market rate, rather than you're carrying the holistic cost.
Yeah.
That switch of model is one that actually massively disadvantages the larger organizations.
Yeah.
If they've already bought their house, they can't rent as easily. Small businesses are living in rented and can move around very, very quickly. I'd say just keeping that leverage, being able to keep doing that is a real advantage that business should exploit.
Yeah, indeed. And we've touched on some of this already around the sort of the change curve, businesses being ready, the sort of the mindset shift and so on. So I'm really interested to hear from you, Adam, around the how. So, if there's the intent and the desire, how do you sort of successfully embark on this sort of, concept of digital transformation? And importantly, how do you sort of ensure that businesses and executive leadership teams, and by the way, recognizing that there's a exec leadership team and an exec board, perhaps sort of lens to this question, but how do you ensure that they are set up for success in delivering digital transformation and not left behind? So
I guess a number of points on this one.
Big question, by the way, Adam. Good luck.
It is, yeah, and I'll have to take a number of angles, I'm afraid. Firstly, it is a team game. If we just come back to the conversation on the portfolio, that potentially changes your funding models. Actually taking a genuinely balanced approach means we need different funding models, so finance and the CFO are impacted. If we accept that this is explorative, well, is an annual NPS good enough? Or do we actually need a weekly or a twice a month form of indication from our customer whether they like what we're doing or not, whether they can be sort of helping steer us towards what good looks like? But there's a whole set of changes that are required across the organization to really get set up for this. So team, sport, absolute point number one. Point number two, the fact that we don't know how we're going to get there makes it massively, massively more important that we know what there looks like. Because otherwise you're blind in both. We haven't got a plan and we don't know where we're going. So being really crisp and clear around when we say digital or when we say transfer, what is it that we're going to look like? We want to have more partners, we want to have more customers, we want to have a different profit margin, we want to have, there can be a range of tools you can use to describe it, but actually having that well described and highly accessible to everyone in the organization is quite important. So for me, when you're starting off, being as transparent and as explicit as you possibly can be around what success looks like in 5 to 10 years is critical. And you always get the pushback across the exec of, yeah, but now you're asking us to do the crystal ball. It's like, well, I'd rather you did it than any one of our 20,000 employees or 100,000 employees did it, because you can guarantee the 100,000 won't come up with the same answer. Mm-hmm. And having them work against each other is the worst possible outcome. So could you 8 or 10 please come up with your best guess? And let's be open enough to change it as we go along, but let's make sure there is one source of truth for how we're going to push this agenda forward. Then I would say creating the culture that is risk tolerant without necessarily being failure encouraging. You don't want moonshots all over the place, but you do want to accept that good ideas sometimes don't make it. And so how do you strike that balance? How do your employees understand that is being the balance that's being sought? And how do you engage them in the overall? So I mean, hackathons, I love. I mean, and I'm not talking about writing code now, just throwing a problem out there to the whole company and getting the creatives and marketing and the very extroverted sales folks to collaborate. They will all take a different approach to the same, and you can learn something from every one of them. So it also creates that kind of buzz around the future. Engaging staff with things like that, I think, is a very useful way of trying to get it started. Yeah.
Excellent. Good. And actually, just to build on that, another question that's come through from the audience, Adam, which is around how best should boards or executive teams diversify to ensure they possess the strategic understanding of digitization and transformation opportunity?
So can you say that again?
So how best should boards or executive teams diversify to ensure they possess the strategic understanding of digitization and the transformation opportunity?
Yeah. So I think there's two angles to this. There's the specialist knowledge and the generalist knowledge. So you absolutely need a specialist somewhere amongst the board, in the same way that the head of your audit committee is unlikely not to be an accountant. You need that specialist discipline. At the same time, members of the audit committee can just be past good cost center managers, ex-CEOs, you can have people around that understand the content without being the expert. And I'd say the same is true for the technology side. We need the expertise, and we need the expertise that can engage with others. We equally need to increase the level of technical awareness in the generalists. One of the things that I run on a couple of the companies that I work with is we have a technology committee, or it's usually a transformation and technology committee. There is a fair bit of technical conversation between the CIO, the CTO, one or two board members who are technically savvy, and a couple of advisors who are technically savvy, but all the rest of the board come along to listen. And when you get into plural, everybody's got multiple jobs, so that they're working. One of the guys that was observing that said, I learned more listening to those conversations than I have in many other boards, because actually you've got experts either end of the conversation rather than just an expert talking to someone who isn't expert.
Yeah.
So we're finding routes like that to increase the education of the board, I think, is important. The other piece is to look at the moment, where technology reports. On the exec side, if you've got technology reporting to the CFO, expect a fairly cheap. It's going to be driven in a certain direction. If it's reporting to the COO, it's going to be focused on efficiencies. Thinking about where you want to put it, including directly under the CEO, if what you're after is a combination of multiple things, becomes quite important.
Yeah, and are you seeing that sort of diversification? And what's your view and perspective on digital literacy and maturity around some of the boards that you've got experience of sitting on?
Unfortunately, boards tend to lag. Let's face it, we're all old. Most board members are not still in an exec role. Maybe I have one or two in a board that are, but the vast majority are doing multiple board roles. That means you're almost at the end of your career or post-typical career. So I would say the board is lagging the exec at the moment in many instances. There's quite a few of the big four have sort of good programs to try and get board literacy up, but I'd say that's still a challenge. Exec-wise, I'm seeing more and more. I mean, you see the odd CIO, CTO moving into CEO roles. I don't think that's necessarily the path I would be looking for. But certainly, and this is where I do think the macroeconomic climate is creating some interest. The question for the last 2 decades has been to the CEO, how are you going to grow? For many, it's now, how are you going to survive? And when it's that survival, the focus will fall on operations. And in many companies, the most expert in operations today is the CIO. Because operations has become so entwined, process has become so entwined with code, that's the only place it's written down. And I'd expect to see a lot more CIOs playing a more active, broader role, regardless of title, in their exco about how to drive efficiencies across the organization. I think that will be very useful for the next generation coming through to board roles.
And in terms of the board makeups, and diversification through that, do you feel that there is a movement towards shaking that up and trying to sort of drive some change for
that? In some sectors. So if you're a Bank of England regulated business, they explicitly ask every year, what is the technology competence of the board? And
interesting, Adam, do they ask what is the technology competence or what is the digital competence?
They ask what is the technology competence. So they're coming at it more from a risk perspective. So do the board genuinely understand the technological risk the bank faces, and can they govern that appropriately? it won't be a huge leap. When you actually look at what they want to measure underneath, they're not measuring technical competence, they're measuring digital competence. So it just shows the banker is confused about it as everyone else. But they are at least asking the question. I think we'll start to see some of the other regulators asking that. And certainly when we start to get some of the consumer champions pushing it, I think that'll be quite interesting.
Yeah, indeed. Good. Well, some really interesting nuggets there in terms of the blueprint for digital transformation from you, Adam. There, thank you very much. The other piece I wanted to talk about is, I suppose, sort of risks, and obviously can't ignore Dr. Hinton and some of the stuff that's been published, obviously quite very recently. So this is all lovely talking about advanced technologies and the opportunities, but risks obviously are sort of front and center of any sort of board consideration too. So it'd be useful to hear from you what your view is on the potential challenges and risks, and more so how should boards and exec leadership teams best prepare for those?
So I think we face a regulatory environment that hasn't yet caught up. I mean, that's not an unusual situation, but both from a regulatory perspective and a legal perspective. I'm always fascinated by the debate on self-driving cars. If as a society we could accept that self-driving cars can have accidents, because accidents can happen to them as much as they can to humans, the debate would be gone. Literally at the moment, the concept is it's a self-driving car, it cannot be allowed to crash. Someone must be at fault. Well, isn't that true for a human driver? I mean, we don't take that stance with a human driver. We accept that you and I bumped into each other and that was an accident. At some point, the regulatory and the legal systems are going to catch up. At the moment, we don't know which way they're going to fall. Now, I think as a board, depending on the sector you're in, I mentioned model governance earlier, that there are certain things that you are obliged to sign off. It's not a huge leap to signing off a risk model to have to sign off an AI model. So I think certain sectors will be ahead of others and the regulators will force that through. It becomes more difficult when you're talking about AI models, but if anyone on the audience has had to sign off a risk model, they'll know that's not easy either. So I expect that'll be an okay one. Outside of those governed industries, I think it's going to be left to law. And that would make me much more concerned as a board member. What I'd be wanting to see is the same kind of stuff you see in cyber. So a good set of cyber reports basically is today's operating. This is how many knocks we got on the front door. This is how many times people got in. This is how many times we caught them. There's a set of stats that show you how the real world is working. I'd want to see the same kind of output from any AI models in use if I was in a non-regulated industry at the moment.
Right, interesting. And what of Dr. Hinton then and his views, Adam? What's your stance on how he sees things developing?
I'd love to know what's gone on. It strikes me there's some trigger that's yet to come out as to why he's had that massive flip. I mean, it's one individual. I think we take it at face value at the moment and then see where it goes. I am not as pessimistic as he is about life at the present time, if I'm honest. But then again, I don't know what he knows, so we'll have to wait and see.
Okay. And certainly, based on your knowledge of sort of latest technology advances, you're very sort of comfortable that it should be us embracing the opportunity.
Absolutely, and at the end of the day, if a system becomes more intelligent than the human, why is that a bad thing? Humans are becoming more and more intelligent over time, arguably. Then why shouldn't computers become more and more intelligent over time? As long as we ensure that the master-slave relationship is the right way around, it shouldn't be a threat. Yeah,
very good. Thanks, Adam. And I've just mindful of time, I've got quite a number of questions that have come through, so I just want to sort of try and field some of those, and some of them will relate to some of the topics that we've already touched on. But one question that's come through is around your thoughts. In fact, there's a couple of questions that are linked. So your thoughts on what it takes to make automation and digital transformation part of the fabric of an organization rather than a project. And another question that's, as I say, very related, how do you create a digital mindset into board members so they stop thinking, stop having to rethink strategies and start leading with digital focus?
But the first one, that handily, there is a solution for that, which is the move to the product model. And organizations that genuinely embrace the product model across all disciplines do successfully navigate from these digital islands to a genuine digital future. Again, that takes trust, it takes empowerment from exec, it takes sponsorship. It's a different way of working. It's accepting that the expertise isn't in the boardroom, it's somewhere down the organization. So how do we tap into it, expose it, and give it the space to thrive? So focusing on those kind of constructs and those kind of beliefs, I would say, is the way to get it embedded in the culture. Mm-hmm. You only need one person in an organization who is genuinely acting as a product owner and has that freedom to act and do, and everybody wants that job. So it's not one you have to spend a lot of time trying to what's the right word, encourage. Once you've got it, you can hire one in, you can then use them as a showcase, and others will flock to that model. Around the boardroom, it's about really changing the conversation, and that's something the exec have to lead. So when you get the exec there saying, look, we're going to give you our vision, but it is just a vision, there is no plan. And here's how we're going to mitigate that. We're not going to go to IMD and do a future back session and plan our way to the end, because we accept we can't. But here's the first steps we're going to take, and here's what we expect to achieve and by when with those steps. We're going to come back and update you when we're there and let you know what the next steps are. That dynamic really changes the board conversation. I'm actively encouraging one of my exec committees to try and do that at the moment, because doing it the old way just isn't going to work for them. And when they've tried it, the results around the rest of the board have been quite interesting, as in positive response. Yeah,
absolutely. Very good. So just continuing with some of the questions that are coming through. So I've got one here, which is, we may have sort of answered this a little bit, but the timing really of, how long do you think it is until this stuff makes significant structural changes to the way organizations are managed and organized, and this stuff being, I guess, let's call it AI and others?
Mm-hmm. 7 to 10 years. And I think people will be in deployment mode before that, but they'll be structuring around getting it into, but to actually fundamentally change the standardized board reporting, the standardized approach to managing the risks within those, are going to take some failures and some regulatory learning, right? Before it's forced across companies. So I would say 7 to 10.
Yeah, so it's fair to say there's quite a bit of hype around that in the media, for instance, and so you're suggesting, Adam, they're probably over shooting that in terms of their eagerness to see some of that change come through.
So it would be good if it was there now. Let's not. What they've done is they've spotted a problem, said someone needs to react to it. Great. Who needs to react and how do they need to react? Is not going to be 1 month, 3 month, or 8 month. To get this right. Yeah, will take a long time. Yeah. So you're not saying to be, you're not advising your boards, for instance, not to sort of, do anything about it now. You're actually saying, you need to start embarking on that journey now. Yep. And in fact, if you haven't already embarked on the journey, you're probably behind the curve. But this is going to be a long journey. Absolutely. To have it. So when you guys advertise for a non-exec director who is the chair of the risk committee, you've got the job description, you know exactly what that role looks like. If we applied that to this space, I'm saying it's 7 to 10 years before we've got a pattern that is approved by the regulators, we know works, all has been adopted, and it's now an execution type job rather than it is a creation type job. So unfortunately, we're still in that space with tech. You won't find a pattern for a tech committee, for example. And one final question, Adam, is how soon will boards be able to rely on information derived from machine learning in their strategic, not tactical decision making? Oh, that's a good question. Now, whoever's asked that, I think, knows what they're doing, because basically machine learning relies on cycles, and you have to go through many cycles for the machine to go, yep, I now see all the patterns. The moment you're getting into strategic conversations in a board space, the cycle time is very, very long. That said, it is the kind of thing that organizations like Google, like Amazon could invest in and take many companies' perspectives to push that forward. So we could say 3 to 5 years if it became a hot topic. Yeah. So what should you do? Are we at the start of a recession or are we not at the start of a recession? Would be a good kind of thing you want coming from that data.
Yes,
you know, it's almost holy grail, but the technology is there and the data, there's enough data there to process if you really throw a lot at it.
Yeah, fantastic. Very good. Well, thank you, Adam. We've made it to the full hour, so we'll probably have to leave it there for today. I'm sort of very conscious that obviously there's a limit to what we can sort of discuss and elaborate, you know, in this particular format, but there's loads more that we can really look to explore, and there's quite a number of questions that have come through that we haven't been able to get to. So if there is any interest from the audience and appetite to have any follow-up with myself or Adam, please do feel free to make contact directly with me, and I'll do my best to see how I can support. So just really want to take a moment, Adam, to thank you once more for your contribution to the webinar this afternoon. It's been really insightful hearing from you, and hopefully a lot for the audience to take away and reflect on. And just to say otherwise, that we've got another webinar planned for June the 28th, which will be a follow-on to this afternoon's webinar, this time on the subject of digital sustainability, hosted by a colleague of mine, John Smith, and he will be joined by the tech editor of The Times, Katie Prescott. So do please register for that, and we look forward to having you all join us next time. But for the time being, from Adam and I, thank you, and see you again soon. Thank you, Adam. Great to see you. Cheers.
Pleasure.
Bye-bye.